fear of what comes after. Hold on for better days.
Hello, and welcome to the Great Trans-American Road Trip podcast. I'm Flint Del Sol.
And I'm Shiloh Del Sol.
And we are trans husbands who decided to leave our roots behind to become permanent nomads, traveling the country in search of community, safety, and belonging. In this podcast, we'll regale you with tales from the road, offer insight gleaned from our experiences, and occasionally chat with friends we make along the way. Today, we're talking about what safety really means, especially from a trans perspective, and especially now.
For those of you that can see the video, I'm playing with Play-Doh. I'm not going to get through an hour-long conversation without a fidget. We're talking about like cleanliness as I get like little bits of Play-Doh.
Where are you getting Play-Doh?
In my journal.
Oh my God.
Which is harder to get out than like if it were just the table, so I'm going to close that. But it's really the best fucking texture and smell. Like,
What does it smell like?
you don't have Play-Doh smell memorized?
Okay, I do now.
Okay.
It's been, okay, for those of us who aren't watching, I'm sniffing a wad of pink Play-Doh. And yeah, it smells like Play-Doh. I don't know. I guess I forgot. Like I expected it to smell like maybe like a fruit, like it was going to be scented.
No, the scented things are sensory overload, but just the smell of Play-Doh alone is the correct.
It is good. You know, we've had like this really big uptick in sensory toys over the last couple of years, and I feel like we've forgotten our roots. We've left Play-Doh behind.
It's back.
Play-Doh's back.
Honestly, my preference is slime until my doctor said it was giving my hands all sorts of weird eczema. So that was honestly like I had a big grieving period that I occasionally forget, and I'll get more slime again, and then my hands will get dry and itchy. Actually, he said wear gloves. What? Wear gloves while playing with slime?
That's psychopath behavior, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're on Play-Doh. It's great. Play-Doh does not cause any allergic reaction.
I do think, right, like if we were going like the Jeff Foxworthy, you're a blank if, like you're neurodivergent if your doctor has had to tell you to stop playing with slime.
Yeah, and what was the more awkward part of the conversation? Because this is the most comfortable I've ever been with a doctor, right? We go to a little queer health clinic, and I am so much more unmasked now. So I'm very upfront about my autism. You know, when he asked what could be causing the things on my hand, I said, well, I've had an uptick in playing with slime. And he's like, excuse me, what? Like, he's like, why? He literally asked me why. He does not fully understand the neurodivergent needs yet. Like, because I like it? Like, okay. Entering into the chart, chemicals causing dermatitis.
Well, so we have the same doctor. And this is actually a really great way to segue into our conversation today about safety.
Yeah.
We have the same doctor. We've had the same doctor for a while in this queer health clinic in a very red part of Southern California. And I believe most of the patients they have are probably cisgender gay men. And the doctors are both cisgender gay men. And it reminds me of just how distant the needs and expectations and the cultural understandings are between like cisgender men and trans men. Like there's just a completely world of difference between what they expect from us.
Yeah, I think there's that. And then there's also generational differences in understanding neurodivergence and our needs, especially like uptake in conversation about sensory needs for regulation. You know, some people just aren't having those conversations, and maybe these like conversations about neurodivergence are happening more in like neuroqueer spaces, which tend to be a little bit more trans and gender nonconforming leaning.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
I will say that like our experience of trying to find a doctor was an almost year-long process, and we're still really struggling with this new life, right, of living on the road. Like where do you get medical care? How do you get prescriptions? I would say that's probably like the number one question that I get from people who are following us on like Instagram or TikTok is like, I've got a trans kid, we live in X state, like how are you getting medication? And I think that this comes back to this big question of, right, like what does it mean to be safe as a trans person in this country right now? Because I think we have different expectations of what that means. And one of the reasons we're doing this is we didn't feel safe where we were, which was in California.
Yeah, and I think, we're going to talk about safety. We have to define it. There's so many aspects of safety. I think of them often as internal and external, right? Like all the things on the outside that can affect us, our physical safety, getting our basic needs met, outside forces that affect our safety, how we feel is internal safety, right? That can be psychological safety, emotional safety. And so there's a lot that goes into it, right? If we use the doctor as an example, like maybe I'm physically safe walking into this doctor's office. There's a lot in my environment that tells me I'm safe. It's a very queer clinic. That doesn't mean I necessarily feel safe speaking up about something that feels vulnerable based on histories I've had with doctors, right? There's a lot that goes into what safety even means. It's really going to be individual.
Yeah, and I think that the simple version of this that especially a lot of cisgender people believe is that a trans person will feel safe in a state that has laws that are built to protect them. I think medical stuff is a really great place to start with that, right? Like somewhere like California, where both of us are from, have probably the most comprehensive laws trying to protect us from medical discrimination of anywhere in the country. But we both experienced medical discrimination in California, and we've had friends that have experienced like horrifying medical discrimination. People who are not able to get their medical needs met or are facing, like, remember we had a friend who was hospitalized and was visited by a chaplain of the hospital like 3 times, trying to essentially convert him to a religion because they realized that he was trans and was using the wrong pronouns, right? Doctors weren't respecting who he was. And it's horrible. Like it happens everywhere. There's no state that's going to protect you from that just by virtue of you being within the bounds.
Yeah, honestly, there was nothing really about California state law that was helpful for me. In theory, California should have covered my top surgery, right? It's supposed to be covered, but just because it's supposed to be covered doesn't mean there's enough doctors offering it. You're not going to be put on a wait list for years. That, it really depends on your provider in California. And this is really where I realized it's the micro level of things that affects us most on a daily basis, right? It really is the individual interaction we're having with our doctor, the individual clinic that we're going to. This has seemed to affect us more. The laws are scary, and those affect us on a psychological level through the fear mongering that's happening on social media. But on a day-to-day basis, it's really been about the individual interactions we have and resources we have available.
Yeah. I was thinking about this experience we had last winter where I had a medical emergency. We needed to go to an urgent care. And even though I'm sitting there, right, like in extreme pain, still making phone calls to urgent cares and emergency rooms asking like, am I going to be safe if I come here? Am I going to have a horrible experience? Because I think a lot of people, right, like I worked for a trans nonprofit that worked in cancer spaces for a while. And one of the reasons that trans people receive medical care less frequently, right, or we have more medical issues overall, is not even direct discrimination, where they're purposefully doing something to hurt you. It is disbelieving what you're experiencing, or in general, the fear that keeps you from going to the doctor in the first place.
Yeah, it's risky and vulnerable. And I think it's taken us having to have those experiences to feel safer doing it, right? We both have had to go to urgent care multiple times during early parts of our transition. And we've moved a lot and had to find, go to places that are unfamiliar, and overcoming that feeling of uncertainty, like the fear that comes from just not knowing how people are going to respond to having to disclose our gender and transition process and educate just to get basic medical care has been stressful. And it's something that has gotten a lot easier. I don't think we could be now in other states without having really gotten comfortable with navigating the medical system. California first. Now being able to, have those established doctors that we can get on a telehealth call with, thank God for telehealth, right? We found a pharmacy that ships us our testosterone. Right, we have people that can go to pharmacies in California to pick up our other meds and ship them to us. It took having to overcome a lot of barriers and establishing a lot of things in order to feel safe enough.
And I think that that point that you're making, that we have people that are in California that if we need them to, can pick things up from a pharmacy and ship them to us. And this comes back to like my perspective on safety, which I know is also yours, which is that to really feel safe somewhere, it's less about the laws, right? Even though those are very helpful and can absolutely negatively impact us. It's less about the laws. It's less about what's happening even nationally. It's a lot more about the community that you have to support you through any of it, right? Like, I think you had mentioned recently that in order to feel safe in your state, in order to feel safe in your country, you have to feel safe in your house first. Like that safety starts on the inside and then works its way out. And all of the things that are messaging us from the outside that are saying that you are unsafe can double down on that lack of safety that you're feeling at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think community, and again, the micro over the macro, the people we interact with on a daily basis that are there to support us ultimately provide the most protection. We've interviewed now over a dozen trans people across like 6 states.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that. And we've come across these small communities that can support each other, under the radar, right? People that are getting themselves prescribed hormones, but then sharing them with friends. And, doctors are starting their own practices so they don't have to work within the orgs that are pre-complying to the laws. We're seeing how people are staying the most safe. It's because they have built up queer community in their vicinity that are all taking steps to protect.
And it's not easy, to find or build those places. No. And I think a lot of things that keep people from having it is the fact that they will have to be the one to build it, to establish it. Or there are a lot of barriers that keep you from knowing where those places are. And it's not enough to just also be queer, in order to find that community. You've got to find other ways to gather and to then show up for each other. Because it's also not just who do you know, but what are you doing within that community to establish that trust and to make it something that's long lasting.
And that's the thing. So many queer people, especially trans people, are dealing with a lot of trauma, right? A lot of familial trauma. And we're also just in a generation that's learning so much about our emotional and communication needs. And we're in a time when we're seeing people have so many trauma responses just from what's happening in the world. That can make it so hard to build trusting relationships. Isolating feels safer, right? Our brains right now that are in survival mode for so many of us, the ways our brain protects us often involves isolating and having a lot of control over our small little environments. And that can make it hard to feel safe reaching out to people. And because developing those connections also means we have to be our authentic selves. I think of so many folks that are still struggling to feel safe doing that because maybe we've talked to a lot of people who've had to move back in with their parents and back into small towns that they had once moved away from because the economy, right? What trans person is thriving economically right now?
I don't trust a single trans person that's thriving economically. What is happening? What are you doing? If you're doing really, really well right now, I have further questions.
People that own big therapy practices. There's some ways to make money as a trans person right now.
That's fair. You're right.
If you've been in the therapy game for a while.
Therapy is the new crypto. We're if you have consistent ways to get people therapy, then you're basically printing your own money at this point, right?
Yeah, and and there are queer people that have inherited money. And that's where we're seeing, honestly, the most successful communities is we have to share resources because you can't fucking work while you're transitioning. Oof. Oh my God. Menopause and puberty at the same fucking time sucks balls. You already had ADHD, now times 10 it because hormones are making everything go nuts, right? Working full time is not an option for a lot of queer people during transitions. And also getting laid off for trans reasons, getting fired, right, for discrimination is something that's happening all the time. And so, that's a whole other conversation about financial safety.
I think that is super relevant to this conversation, right? Financial safety is also the way we were able recently when we had a really intense conversation with a Trumper at an RV park. Mm-hmm. Again, RV parks being this really unique place to have a strange little community. And the kind of safety and freedom that he understood best was financial freedom and financial safety. When we were talking about how the thing that keeps you from feeling secure is often that if you miss a paycheck, you're homeless. If you, right, like so many queer people don't have roots with like a biological family. That's what most people's safety nets are. Is if they really, really needed to, right? They could, if they got fired or if they lost their house, they have somebody they could go crash on a couch for a while as they figure it out. A lot of queer people don't. That is one of the big differences. And it's usually not a choice, right? It is something that is a separation that is really, really hard to mend, if ever. And so that safety net doesn't exist. And so when you're talking about sharing resources, that's what found family is supposed to mean, right? Is that you are lifting up and supporting each other. It has to be outside of it cannot just be a group chat, right? You're not just a group chat. You are a family, and a family has to be there for each other. And you're right. Sometimes you've got somebody who has additional resources or has land, right? Or has, in our case, right, a really nice silver Twinkie that's getting towed all over the country. And when you have something, whatever it is, finding a way to share it, which can be the opposite of our initial reaction, because when we are afraid, when we feel unsafe, we tend to like dive back into our shells, right?
Yeah, well, scarcity mindset kicks in. This is this whole idea of reciprocity and giving to each other what you can to be able to survive as a trans person and thrive, right? Because you can survive freaking hustling. So many trans people are hustling, and having to hustle to survive is also what's keeping them from like being able to rest enough to heal and for their nervous systems to calm down enough for their bodies to not be on high alert all the time. Just there's so many privileges that I think people that don't live in states of constant uncertainty of their safety have. But yeah, we wouldn't have been able to take this risk without knowing that we have friends that will have our backs.
Yeah.
Before that, we had to rely on family, and relying on family can really affect your emotional safety if you're someone that comes from any sort of family trauma, which most neuroqueer people do. And it's a huge privilege to be able to step away from family, like you said. Often that's the only safety net, which is why there's such a huge percentage of unhoused people that are queer, that are neurodivergent. Because they've had to break family ties. And so, yeah, creating that family is huge. Honestly, what's felt so safe about this experience is everywhere we go, we are finding these queer chosen families, and it's incredible.
I've enjoyed, I think, the most that the reason that we have the route that we do, right? Because this country is very large and we can go pretty much anywhere. There are a couple of things that limit where we are and why. One of them is cost. And so in that case, I'm realizing as we go that there is a really intense financial barrier that keep queer people from being able to access at least perceived safety geographically. Like a lot of these places that have huge queer communities are also very thriving metropolises that do not have availability for like a trailer, any close to anything, right? We're looking like $100, $150 a night to park somewhere versus right in the middle of Idaho, which is $30 to park. And those are places where you're probably going to feel a little bit less safe as a queer person. And so that's one of the things that's going to be dictating our journey. The second is we're sort of going where other trans people are and have asked us to come. One of our very first stops is Salt Lake City. And so we just left Salt Lake City less than a week ago. And now we're traveling up through the like northwestern United States. And I think one thing that I didn't expect is that the queer people, specifically the trans people, right, who are living in these communities that you would typically not associate with safety, are actually experiencing higher degrees of internalized safety than people who are in these intense city centers, which I didn't think was going to happen.
Yeah, it's really interesting how in the same city, right? So for those of you that don't know, about a month or two ago now, we put out a survey. And we've gotten about 600 responses from people across the country and Mexico and Canada, asking for those that are willing to meet us and be interviewed to talk about their experience as a trans person, where they're living. We also got responses just from people willing to host us and support us if we're in their hometown. even just looking at those survey responses, it's fascinating that we've had, right? Maybe 15 people reach out for Salt Lake City. Some people saying it's incredible to live there and they have so many great resources and they feel happy and they feel safe. And then others saying the exact opposite, that they want to leave and it's horrible and they feel unsafe, within the same, 20-mile radius or whatever. Like, what is it about their experiences? And I think some of that is the safety even within the house that they're living in, with the people that they interact with most often, their closest relationships have a huge impact. And then whether or not they've been able to access the resources that are there.
Yeah, I think our one of the first people we talked to in Salt Lake City had to move back after having moved away, right? Like he tried to move to a more liberal part of the country and it didn't work out and he had to come back. And he was shocked to find out that there were other trans people in Salt Lake City. There are multiple trans-owned bookstores in Salt Lake City, multiple. And he had never heard of them because it's hard sometimes to figure out even how to find these places, how to research them. And then when do you go? when are the events? And yeah, his experience was one of extreme isolation. He was there caring for family members. And so the more isolated you are, the less safe you'll probably feel. And this sort of all brings me to this Instagram post I made a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Well, who knows when we're actually going to publish this, but it's a couple of days ago as of right now, where I gave sort of our top 10 places that we have stayed since we started this journey together, which was back in February, right? We've been to 9 states. We've traveled 4,000 miles. And we've stayed in a lot of cities, a lot of small towns, a lot of middle and nowhere KOAs. And we just took the 10 places we sort of liked the best for a bunch of reasons and ranked them. And I did not expect that we would be across TikTok and Instagram, we're at like 500,000 views and then thousands of comments. People have huge feelings about our rankings. Why do you think that is? Why do you think this was something that really touched a nerve for a lot of people?
One, I think when we see a snippet of something on the internet, right, we don't have a lot of context and a lot of us are naturally just projecting and making assumptions about things we see, right? So a lot of people were assuming we were saying what are the safest places we've been or what are the places we think y'all should move. And it's like, no. This is just the 10 places we've really enjoyed for our own reasons. And I think it's hard. We live in times where people are looking for answers to anything.
Yeah.
Like, please, someone just give me the answer to what steps do I take to feel safe? Where do I go to feel safe? How do I just take a little bit of the sting and dread of existing right now away?
Oof.
And we're not here to fucking do that because no one can give you the answer but yourself. And that's the hardest thing. Finding what works for you is going to happen in your own exploration, in your own therapy sessions, in conversations with friends and family. That's so personal, right? And so we cannot make the call for anybody about what's most safe for them. So I think it makes sense that we got such a huge response in so many ways because one, people are just misinterpreting and are upset that we're giving recommendations. It's no. Please don't take anything you see on social media as a personal recommendation to you ever. Please be analyzing everything you're reading all the time and making your own decisions based on much more information. But also people just have different experiences of those places. People that have lived there for a long time have a different experience that people just are passing through. Our experience as nomads is going to be so different of someone that's that's their primary residence.
Yeah.
Because the reason we feel safe everywhere is we know we can leave.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
I can be fully unmasked and feel really safe in Boise because I know we're going to be gone in another couple of weeks and we don't have to come back if we have a bad experience here, if we get a weird inkling, right?
And that's one of the reasons we did this, right? This kind of the big question of why are we in this trailer right now? Why are we not in the house that we lived in for a year? When we realized we couldn't stay where we were, we could have figured something else out, right? We cashed in a retirement that I spent a decade saving to buy this place. We could have used it for a down payment on somewhere in any state in the country. And the reason we did this is because we knew that the situation nationally was so fluid was changing so fast, and we had had such a hard time finding safety. We knew the thing that was going to make us feel safe was the ability to leave, was going to be bouncing and going in a lot of different places. And there are a lot of people that sounds like actual hell, to like never actually have a place that they're solid forever. Because really, like you said, there is no answer for what's going to make you individually feel safe as a trans person.
Okay, well, I got the chills because my social work brain just like turned on for a second.
Oh, let's hear it.
And you just reminded me of like what, psychologically safety is. It's agency. It's choice. And so many things make us feel like we don't have choices right now. And this is so important for teachers and for parents working especially with youth, because they often are the most disempowered because they're at the whims of their parents. Is choice is what feels the safest. Someone that chooses, like getting to choose to live here, getting to choose, this nomad lifestyle felt empowering to us. Someone getting to choose living anywhere else. It's when you feel like you have no choice around where you are, who you're around, right? Or you not just you feel it, you don't, for economic reasons, for whatever reason, don't have choice and agency. That disempowerment feels unsafe.
Yeah, I think about that shrinking map, right? Like you look at the map all the time, they say the places that trans people can be. And I think that the reason that those maps really ignite a particular fear in us is that it makes us feel like we are losing that agency. The reason why the fear, there's some trans people that have never gotten a passport in their whole lives, right? They're in their 50s, 60s, never had a passport. They stayed in the same city their whole life. That all of a sudden they found out when they couldn't get one, that was when they felt supremely unsafe. Rightfully, because it's our government telling us that we have fewer choices than we had before. They're saying, no, you actually have to be in this little circle. And we say this all the time, right? When it comes to labels, that a cat doesn't like to be put in a box, but sometimes a cat will get in one on their own. The same thing here, right? Like anytime you have other people telling you what you can and cannot do and where you can be and how you should live, that's the thing that is going to ignite your feeling of being unsafe. And it's one of the reasons both of us have big love for teenagers, right? I taught high school for most of my adult life. You're a coach who works primarily with teen clients, right? Or parents of teens. We love teenagers because it's when they're starting to figure out their agency. And a lot of parents want to know, why is my kid acting out? Why is my kid not listening to me? Why is my kid in depressive episodes? And there are a lot of answers to those questions. A common thread is often a lack of agency or a lack of perceived agency.
Yeah.
How much control do they have over their own life? How many of their decisions do they feel like they get to make? And it's true for adults too. Nobody likes to be told what to do.
Yeah, nobody does. And you add like some autistic demand avoidance on there, and like then you're really, getting a lot of shutdowns or meltdowns resulting from this feeling of powerlessness. I just forgot what I wanted to talk about. You said so many good things.
I know, I'm so sorry. You have a notebook that you're not using.
I know. I'm going to have to switch from Play-Doh to notebook. It's now, I've played with it so much that now we're getting to it sticking to my fingers. So it needs to cool.
All good things must come to an end. Right,
oh my gosh, that just triggered my memory of what I was going to say.
Oh, amazing.
We talked about autonomy. We recently heard somewhere the phrase, choose your hard. Like, being a human being's hard. Having a brain that has a full range of emotions that's going through collective and individual trauma, like pretty regularly right now. Everything's going to feel hard, but something about getting to choose your hard. Like, are you choosing the hard of, staying in one place that may be, in a red space or feel unsafe? Like, choosing that versus choosing the hard of always having to look for the next best place to live on the road, right? What it comes down to is having a choice.
The top 10 post had a lot of really, really wonderful comments, right? People who were excited to see their city on the list or who had suggestions about where we could go next. But it was surprising to me for a second until I thought about it, that some people reacted with such intense anger. It's because of what you always say about social media, is that it's a projection machine, right? People are going to project their own issues onto whatever canvas you provide for them, right? And I'm thinking about this comment that I got that was so upset about the concept, right, of a blue dot in a red state, which we've been to a couple of different places, right? Salt Lake City is a really good example of that. They have their own city pride flag that they designed just to get around Utah law. That's fucking badass. none of the places we lived in California ever did something like that. We've lived in some really, really red places in California. And this person said, well, you're still going to have to deal with the laws in each of those states. And I was like, absolutely. And then you have some states that have laws and people are going to go against them anyway, or you're still going to be the victim of a hate crime. And their answer, right, was, well, if you live in a red part of a blue state, that must be because you love racism.
The things people say in your comments sometimes, really, it's wild.
Yeah.
Wild times. Yes, when we lived in Victorville, California, it was because we loved racism. It's a wild statement. Have we not heard of poverty and yeah, that concept of choice? That person's assuming that everyone has the choice to choose where they live.
Yeah.
We were there by necessity.
We were there because that's where the house was.
That's where we had a house. We didn't have to pay rent because we needed to leave our jobs to recover from burnout, take time to transition and understand ourselves and our identities. Being able to choose where you live is a huge privilege.
It is. And before that, we lived in another red part of California because we were born there. Most people don't end up leaving the place they were born. That's where you are. And I think, this goes back to on the internet, especially, there's no way to win, because when you leave the place you were born, you're abandoning the people that were there, right? You've got that whole discourse happening with Rosie O'Donnell right now, who's left and gone to Ireland. And honestly, huge power to Rosie for if she can do it, she did. She's great. She's trying to sell her car on Instagram right now. I love that for her. And she's getting some criticism that she is abandoning the United States, right? Why should she get to leave when so many of us need to stay? But then if you stay, you're criticized. Well, if you wanted to be in a place that was more friendly, why don't you just move to a place that's more friendly? There's no option that is actually the right option.
Well, in order to actually feel safe and embody our agency, we have to be okay with disappointing people and with not making decisions based on what other people think. It's really hard when we live in a society that's conditioned us to, obey thy mother and father.
You went to Catholic school and you don't know
the wording exactly of the first commandment. Is it the first? Oh, God.
That is not the first commandment.
No.
I know that. I'm a
terrible Catholic. I mean, obviously. Thank God I'm a terrible Catholic.
Obviously, you're a terrible Catholic. Yeah, no, I guess you are a pretty bad Catholic. That's true.
Yeah.
You did have the Pope bless one of your marriages, though, right? Just not this one.
Hence why I'm bad Catholic. Definitely.
So I want to go back to, again, some things that make people angry within that conversation of safety, and it being such a uniquely personal experience. Because one of the other big criticisms is that we didn't like Portland. And I think it's really important to point out, we actually did like Portland. And I still do like Portland. But Portland, I think for a lot of queer people, trans people across the entire country, is kind of built up as the queer utopia. This is the place. If you are born in the middle of Kansas or in the southern tip of Florida, or even where we grew up, right, in Orange County in California, a lot of people say, well, one day I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to go somewhere like Portland. And so I think anytime a place is given that much power, it's not going to live up to it, because Portland's just a place like anything, right? It's a city with really fantastic pho, but still just a city.
Yeah, with different challenges, right? Now you have the challenge of figuring out how to afford living there, while there might be more obvious ways to create queer community, right? There's more meetups, there's more things happening. It still takes a lot of effort, and it can feel hard to access some of that, break into those circles in a way that feels really good and safe. And a lot of places that have less queer community, because their survival depends on it, there's something about the way community comes together. It can get really petty in some of the bigger spaces too.
Are you talking specifically about the factions of drag kings in West Hollywood?
I prefer not to really have to know about that, is the thing, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have infighting and problems with communities everywhere, right? Even the ones that you build up. I was really big into roller derby for a long time, right? I was a coach for 10 years. And a lot of times we think of roller derby as this really great example of equity in sports. And that's true. And it's also true that it's a super petty space, because all spaces are super petty, right? We've known about queer community in small cities in San Bernardino County that have weird factions working against each other. That's going to happen everywhere. You can't assume that just being in the right geographical place or being enrolled in the right queer softball league or being, in the right government space is going to just fix the fact that people are still running it and are still part of it.
Right. We'll say, anywhere you go, you're still there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people have emotions. So many of us are trying to break generational, familial, and cultural cycles of like poor communication, and just there's so much that can create conflict in any community. And it's going to happen because we're human beings. And so anywhere you go, there's going to be some element of having to work through those things. And ultimately, it's about what works for you, right? Some of us need to be in smaller towns to feel safer, need to be more in nature. That's one thing we're learning is we are most regulated. It doesn't depend on how close we are to the person next to us. It depends on whether or not there's a body of water, because that's just what regulates us is going on a walk. And it's like knowing yourself and giving yourself the opportunity to explore what it is that you need to feel good and safe and connected in your environment.
It reminds me so much of our very, very good friend Cal, who, because I used to not understand outside people. I was an inside person for a very long time until I transitioned. And all of a sudden, the place that felt the most safe was no longer indoor spaces. I didn't feel safe and connected to myself inside. I started to really understand why outside was calling to me. My friend Cal, who understood that way before I did, said, well, yeah, of course you want to be outside. Like, what bird is going to misgender you? Like, when you are outside, you are the most connected to your natural sort of highest self, right? And so, yeah, our priorities are bodies of water.
Well, I'll add too that, there's so much research on nature for helping all sorts of people, but there's specifically research on people that are autistic, and that aligns with our experience because, part of being autistic and transitioning is learning how to be embodied again. So many trans people, so many autistic people have dissociated from their bodies for so long, for so many reasons. It's just a really overstimulating body, right? Nature is one way that helps us get in our bodies that feels safe, right? And a lot of that came from first getting our bodies aligned with our gender identity helped us feel safe. And we're trying to learn how to be more in our bodies. That's part of this lifestyle we've chosen of traveling, is to be able to slow down, make our own work schedules, and pivot to meet the needs of bodies that have been through a lot.
They really have.
Yeah.
And it's not even just bodies that have been through a lot in terms of transitioning, right? Like the actual physiological changes, but God, just remembering that you have a body at all. I had a conversation with someone recently about the fact that your pain tolerance tends to go down when you're transitioning. And I'd only ever talked to other trans masculine people about this, where we had all gone on testosterone and we're like, yeah, your pain tolerance goes down. Easy way to know that is that I tried to get another tattoo after I started T, and I was like, oh, this sucks. Like, no thanks. And I haven't gotten another one since. And then I talked to a trans woman about it, and she had the exact same experience. And I was like, well, okay, so how could it be testosterone that is making me feel more pain now? And she said, well, my thought is that it's actually that we are learning to not dissociate from our bodies anymore. That we have just sort of floated through being alive for so long. And it really, honestly, so much of this comes back to finally feeling like we live inside of our bodies. And you are going to have to feel a lot of pain in order for that to be possible. There is no way to skip that part when you're understanding yourself. And this is true for people who aren't transitioning, right? Like if you're the parent of a trans kid, who for whatever reason is a really huge part of my viewership, I have that experience too. Of finally listening to yourself, right? You realize that you're autistic. You realize you're ADHD. You realize that you don't want to be in your marriage anymore. You realize you don't want to be with your church anymore. You realize you don't want to be in your hometown anymore. Whatever it is that you're figuring out about yourself, you are having to move into the space in which you are finally feeling things instead of just numbing through it.
Yeah, feeling things is how we get there. There's the masking that's performing what you think you're supposed to do in order to feel joy, to feel success, and to thrive, right? And so many of us live in that autopilot for so long of going through these motions. And then there's slowing down to stop doing those things to really find our own feeling. And so for some of us, when we touch on that, it's so painful because finding what brings us joy and brings that us authenticity also is going to unmask all of the pain and the hurt. You can't mask one without masking the other.
Yeah, there's no, we had this written above our door in our old house was that you can't choose what you're unmasking, right? You sort of unmask everything at once, which is why when people realize that they're one thing, it tends to snowball into realizing that there's a lot of other stuff, right? We're told who we are from the time we're born. And it feels, back to safety, feels very unsafe to actually be who you are. And when you do start to crack that shell open, right? In transness, we call it cracking the egg. When you start to crack it open and figure out who you are, it tends to all spill out at once. You tend to avalanche into a new person. And that is, like even the metaphor feels kind of painful. And it is. You have to relearn everything about yourself. You remember that time when we first started figuring out who we were? We realized we were trans guys, right? We realized that we couldn't be hustling as hard as we were. We were both killing ourselves at our jobs. And we started really slowing down. We realized we didn't know what our favorites of anything actually were. We had focused so much of our attention on other people for so long, right? As teachers, especially, on what other people needed, on how to help other people figure out who they were, that we'd never developed our own real identities.
Yeah, and also it's human nature, and the only constant is that we're always going to be changing. So you always need to be checking in on what our needs and likes and wants are, because they're going to be evolving constantly. But for a lot of us, what's felt safe has also been fawning, right? Like when we talk about safety, we also have to talk about what our brains do when we don't feel safe, right? Which is fawn, freeze, flight, and fight. That's why we see comment sections on the internet often that are those fight parts coming out to make people feel safe. But for those of us that fawned when just masked, right, to survive unconsciously, it takes a lot of slowing down to check in with ourselves to figure out what our needs really are. And I'm remembering now that, you were getting into hormones. Just change can feel so unsafe, right? Uncertainty, unknowns feel unsafe. And, I work with a lot of neuroqueer teenagers. Your hormones and body is changing so much in teenagehood. Your like mental development is changing so quickly, and you still don't have so many of the mental resources that you'll have in another 10 years once your brain's had more time to cook. And there's so much that is challenging about that. And I think, anytime we can help parents and teachers understand like the neuroqueer teenage experience is so amplified by changing hormones, navigating so many firsts, everything is for the first time, that this lends itself to how do we create safe, I'm talking about safety, just safe home and school environments.
Yeah.
For our most vulnerable students and kids.
Yeah, because if it were as easy as just what state you were in, I think that there's an allure to that, to thinking that if you just get to the right state, or if you can give people the advice to get to the right state, then it's over. Then they can be safe there, and then that's it. And it's really uncomfortable to consider that might not be enough, right? It's not even that we're recommending something that's the wrong answer. You're recommending something that's like 10% of the answer. Being in the right state, like the country as a whole is working really hard to eradicate trans existence. You aren't just going to be able to shuttle yourself to a state that's going to be this iron bubble of protection that's going to keep you from internalizing all of those messages, that's going to keep you from accessing the medicine that you need, to keep you from the people that are going to make you feel supported. Like so much goes into that. And it really, it starts with realizing that you are the same you no matter where you are.
So many of us want an answer that's something we can do, because the feeling of helplessness is too much to bear. But really what, right, neuroqueer kids need is to know that they can come to you. There's not something specific you're going to be able to do or provide them that like fixes the discomfort that they're in. It's gonna pass. It's gonna pass. The first year of transition, oh my God, as someone who is so sensory sensitive with like facial hair growing, it felt like I was getting stabbed in the face all day long for like 6 months. It was terrible. And like there's things as a parent and teacher that you just can't take away, but what you can do is reduce demands and be a place to hold when they're in the big feels, a place that's okay to have big feelings, and that your priority is not going to be them doing the supposed to's, because getting through even little things can be really, really tough when you're transitioning and dealing with neurodivergent sensory issues. And safety is just knowing that there's an adult that will have your back.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, though. And this was what we learned, when we had these studies for a long time that asked, how does a student feel safe at school? And the number one determination was whether or not they had at least one safe adult on that campus. It didn't matter what was happening anywhere else, how many clubs there were, or how many signs that had rainbows were on campus. Do they have at least one adult they feel they can come to during the day and be vulnerable about what they need and honest about their experiences? There's no way to shortcut that. And this is sort of, when we think about the purpose of this project, why are we doing this? Why are we wandering all the way around? Is not to try to convince anyone that Idaho is going to be the place for them. That's not at all what's happening. But there are a lot of trans people in Idaho right now who do not have the option to leave. And if the only message they get is that you have to go to Portland or else your life is going to be miserable, that is not an answer. How do you find community in Idaho? How do you find it in Montana, in Florida, in Texas, in Kansas, wherever? Because we can't all go to Portland. And if we can't all go to Portland, then where do we go? And how do we find this community? How do we build it for ourselves? How do we construct internal safety? Because if all you have is go to this state, you'll be safe there, and then they go and they aren't, we can't promise anybody that.
No. And, I'm so excited for the YouTube video series to come out because we have so many important conversations about uniting people in the areas they already are in and what resources are there. And so much of it is just feeling seen and connected and sharing what those resources are. So I'm really looking forward to putting that out there.
I'm excited to put that out there too. I think that as we continue this journey, we're going to be doing these podcasts every once in a while. They're a lot easier to produce transparently than video series. And so, yeah, we want to talk more about what we're experiencing as we go around and all the cool and interesting places we're visiting. Today, we are coming to you from Boise, Idaho, which is why Idaho is primarily the example that we used. And we are leaving here to head into Oregon next. But today, for sure, we're going to go float down the Boise River, which is one of the reasons why Boise made the list, because there's a body of water, which is what I need to feel safe. All right, so we are reaching the end of our time. Shiloh, is there anything else you feel like we absolutely need to talk about before we close it out?
The disclaimer, this is the very beginning of a conversation about safety. I'm so excited to dive into all the ways that there are specific things we can do to attune to ourselves and others to help each other feel safe. There are concrete things, but we have to start with understanding. It really comes down to individual autonomy before we can get into the nitty-gritty.
Husband, you're so smart.
Thanks. You too.
All right, so thank you for joining us today. If you want to support our work, the easiest way is to become a subscriber on Substack, hopefully a paid subscriber, or else donate to us directly at delsolimpact.com. You can follow along with us on our journey on Instagram and TikTok at my account, JustFlintIsFine, and look out soon for our great Trans-American Road Trip web series, which will be out on YouTube. And remember, when we feel like we can't be anywhere, we are all still everywhere.